Good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is for you. Welcome on the behalf of Pacific Forum and the Henry Luce Foundation to the second iteration of our Pressing Security Concerns in Southeast Asia, Next Gen Perspectives or Next Generation Perspectives. My name is Dr. John Hemmings. I am the Senior Director for the Indo-Pacific Foreign and Security Program here at Pacific Forum, and I am your host and moderator for today's event. Welcome. It's very great to have you here. Pacific Forum is a Honolulu-based foreign and security policy institute. We have a number of research initiatives, cross-cutting dialogues, public webinars, next generation programs, which are going to be 20 years old next year. And we have been trying for 20 years and for even longer than that, 30 years, if you go back to our original foundation, 1975, to promote a deeper understanding of between different countries and different peoples in the Indo-Pacific region. And our Young Leaders Program, which is run by my colleague Carol Lee, is a real catalyst for training, I think, the future leaders of the region and the United States for tomorrow. And so having them at this stage is a huge benefit for us at Pacific Forum, because we get to see them in their early stages of greatness, and we get to expose to some of their thinking and some of their ideas, and we get out of that sort of policy trap mindset that you can see in some of the some of the capitals of our region where mainstream thinking is encouraged. I think we have a very original publication that corresponds to this this research initiative. If you go online, you can find it, and I believe it is also going to be dropped into our chat shortly so that you can see that. And as I say, this is a project that asked young leaders, what are the problems in Southeast Asia in your region, and what would be some of the solutions that you thought should be put forward for them? So very, hard-hitting policy relevant. I'm going to start off by introducing each panelist. They're going to give remarks for about 10 minutes, and then we'll move to the next panelist. And at the very end, we will have a question and answer sort of discussion. Today's program, of course, is on the record. And we do ask that if you're interested in keeping in touch with people, sending them questions later on through the, let me just see, it looks like the publication. Yes, the publication is now in the chat group, so please open it, have a look at their remarks. You don't have to do it right now, of course, during our discussion, but just know that that's, this webinar is the result of, a lot of months of hard work on their behalf of writing, studying, research, and thinking, which is the whole point of a think tank is to think. Okay, I'll jump right in. Our first speaker is Tia Win Ong. He's an independent political analyst from Myanmar. He received his Master of Arts in Political Science from Central European University in 2022, and Master of Public Policy from National Graduate Institute of Policy Studies in Japan in 2020. Given the situation in Myanmar, it's not surprising to see that his interests are in social movements, of course. Interestingly, social networks, digital humanities, and Southeast Asia politics more generally sort of complement them. Tia, you had probably the most, I thought, deeply relevant given the current state of Myanmar politics. We are super excited to hear how you think the world should think about what's happening in Myanmar. I know the strength of your paper will be reflected in your remarks, and I know you won't disappoint. So with that, sir, the floor is yours. And can I ask the other panelists to switch off their cameras so that Tia can have the floor? Thank you with that. Tia, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Dr. Hemmings, and I'm very excited to share my presentation and remarks for my book chapter. Let me just quickly share. So the book chapter I wrote about is the situation in Myanmar, and many of you are already aware that there's ongoing political instability and political violence in Myanmar that has huge security implications, not only to the Indo-Pacific region, but also to the wider international affairs. So I hope that I can give you more nuanced views of what's really going on and how this the political violence is happening in Myanmar. So a quick recap. There was a military coup d'etat in February 2021 in Myanmar, and it triggered massive peaceful demonstrations where we witnessed millions of people marching on streets and millions of civil servants join the civil disobedience movement, where they refused to work for the military regime. And of course, initially, the analysts expected that the military would ultimately crush the resistance and reassert their control. And after seeing so much violence, they believed that the people of Myanmar would just back down because of the violence from the military, but they were wrong. Within a few months of the peaceful demonstrations dying down, we witnessed the resistance reorganize itself into armed revolt, and these armed militias are known as People Defense Forces (PDF), and they are loosely under the parallel government called the National Unity Government (NUG). But of course, these many groups sometimes act independently, and they have been engaging in the armed conflicts with the military all over the country. Sometimes they are in alliance with the existing ethnic armed organization. And the result is that the military regime has struggled to control many parts of the country. This is what we are witnessing from Myanmar. And here you can see the lines where the opposition, the parallel government, National Unity Government, declared People's War, what is called People's War, in September 2021. And since then, the political violence has escalated. And here you can also see the map on the right side of the screen, where the military controls only the areas that are shown as white in the map. And many parts, especially the rural areas, are not under effective control of the military regime right now. So the military is only controlling the urban areas, big cities at the moment. So how come like the resistance could evolve into something like this? And I argue in my book chapter that to understand what's really going on, we have to look at what happened over the last decade. And there has been a democratic transition, so-called democratic transition, which not only provided the political freedom, but also remarkable liberalization and deregulation of the market. And with that, new social groups emerged, and the old military guard that used to control the economy without any competition, they feel threatened. And I wrote in my book chapter that the control over the economy was one of the reasons in Myanmar military's calculus to stage this coup d'etat in the first place. So we have to understand what's going on. And as you can see, over the last decade, the GDP per capita has doubled. And more importantly, the political economy has shifted very significantly. If you look at what happened in 1919 and what happened in 2014 and 2019, there has been a shift in the political economy into sectors that give more money and more stable jobs, so as to speak, such as secondary sector and the tertiary sector. And these sector provided many jobs that also depended on the foreign direct investment into the country, and also provided so much upward social mobility for many groups. So the people of Myanmar associated the democratic transition with the economic growth, so as to speak. So they started to see the changes in their lives over the last decade. And this is significant. This is very significant because over the last 5 years, when we talk about Myanmar, we have been rightly focusing on other crises that is going on, the Rohingya genocide that has been committed by the military, and the frustrations of many minority groups who felt that they have been marginalized again by the democratic government. But still, like, what I'm trying to argue here is that there have been changes in the economy that is very significant and very genuinely felt by the ordinary people all over the country. And I disaggregate these data in my book chapter, but I'm not going to go all over the details here. But I can very quickly give you like to see the extent of the changes in the economy. The price of a mobile SIM card in 2010 was 7,000 USD. This was the time I got my first SIM card, actually. Not because I was rich, but like at that time, people wanted a SIM card, and the only way you can have SIM card is if you could afford like 5,000, 6,000 USD, which was very ridiculous. But in 2020, the price of a SIM card has fallen down to just 1 USD. This is the extent of the changes that have taken over the place. And this has translated to 1 million new workers in secondary sector and 3 million new workers in tertiary sector in 2019. So there has been substantial growth in the middle class all over the country. And these social groups has consolidated into social classes. And one of the signs that these groups are being consolidated is if you look at the changes in the education sector, and you can see that there's so much upward social mobility in the education sector as well. I'm not gonna go into detail as well because of the time limit here, and there have been clash between these new social groups, social classes, so as to speak, with the military over the last decade, even before the military coup. The university students, the young people, they have been calling for changes in the country, and they have been calling for more welfare, more spending in education and healthcare. And we witnessed these changes over the last decade. And when the military coup happened, the people they felt that their future has been stolen, and this is how they felt about the military coup. And with the changes that they have witnessed over the last decade, and because of these changes, they believe that the military is not going to back down this time. And with the military coup, we also witnessed so much reversal of the economic growth, and now the over 40% of the population is behind the poverty line again. The economy contracted by 18%, and if you look at what's happening to the inflation, it is going very rapidly, very high. And so for people who associated the socioeconomic growth with the democratic transition, they see that they cannot accept this military self-imposed rule over the country anymore. And this has been the structural conditions that have given rise to why people cannot accept the military control over the country anymore. And very quickly, I would like to speak about the immediate causes as well. And as you probably know about the demonstrations in Myanmar, we witnessed the incredible ruthless violence acts committed by the military. And people felt at the time that there was no other way out, because nobody is gonna come help them. So like they felt that there was no other way out. And we see violence after violence, and hundreds of peaceful protesters were murdered in 2021, and all the images were broadcasted on social media. And this is how they came to think that the only way out of this was to stage armed revolt. Of course, we call for R2P, for the international community to intervene, but it never materialized. So this is how the political violence in Myanmar evolved into the armed conflict, the armed violence by the young people. So key takeaways. I'm sorry if I'm very quick, but I have to finish it within 10 minutes, and we can talk about more if you have more questions. And the political violence we are witnessing right now has the structural origins, where we witness the emergence of new social group, middle class, and why the protests were initially peaceful, the escalating violence by the military regime, and the helplessness of international institutions make people realize that the military is not going to give up and there's no other way out. So there's gonna be violence until this revolutionary situation is resolved. And the international community, if they would like to see the stable country in this very important geopolitical region of Indo-Pacific, they have to make an explicit stand and assist the armed resistance to ensure its success. Thank you very much. This is 10 minutes, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Tia. That was very powerful. And yeah, of course, I think everyone will be thinking of some great questions for you at the end of the sessions, given some of the ideas you've raised. The R2P one, which is unfortunately for Myanmar, is so unpopular now in the world and in the West as well. Ariel, can I ask you to come up, sir? I see you're already up, and Tia, would you turn your screen off? That would be very kind, so that Ariel, I'll just briefly introduce you. You're here in Honolulu, and I should say pursuing a PhD. So I congratulate you on that, as someone myself who's done one and knows how hard they can be. You're here at University of Hawaii at Manoa, which is literally just down the road from me. So very, very happy to see a local friend, an island friend. Ariel hails from Timor-Leste and is a student affiliate at the East-West Center in Honolulu, which many of you know is an organization we have very close links and work with often. This paper also to be very, very interesting. Ariel sort of challenges some of the norms of what makes countries vulnerable to climate change. And I think he does so in a way that is both well thought through and original. And so, Ariel, I'm very curious to hear the exploration of your ideas in person. So with that, sir, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, John. So my work really stems from the work that I did for 2 years in graduate school on climate adaptation, or as the title suggests, climate maladaptation, and looking specifically at non-traditional security topics on migration and food insecurity. What happens when climate adaptation projects do not materialize? As I preface in my chapter with a bit of story that highlights a bit of this issue in Timor. So 2 years ago, in the island of Timor, where I come from, it was hit by a torrential rainfall across Timor-Leste induced by a tropical cyclone called Seroja that resulted in a massive countrywide floods and landslides that destroy infrastructure, killed dozens of people, and displaced more than 10,000 people. So for an island country that only has 1 million population, that is very significant, and this is unprecedented. And the damages to the agriculture sector, to the housing sector, and the transportation infrastructure is more than 250 millions. And there, a lot of report came out and said how, like the cyclone affected the poorest and most vulnerable people in Timor. As a result of the loss of livestock and destruction of crops. So following Cyclone Seroja, so one big question that animates my chapter in this volume is, are climate resilient projects effective in protecting communities from climate change adverse effects? Every year we spend millions of dollars on climate adaptation, on climate mitigation, climate risk reduction, and yet the promise of resilience is out of reach for many people. And Timor-Leste has been exposed to tropical cyclones in recent years, and we are in the top 50 in terms of climate-related natural hazard risk. Because of more climate change, increasingly we see increasing temperature and frequent hydrological disasters that lead to frequent occurrences of like heat waves, droughts, floods, and landslides. And those pose serious risks to agriculture productivity. So for my chapter, I turned my attention to agriculture in the sense that how can we think more of climate change and how it affects agriculture productivity and then drive human mobility, especially in a country like East Timor, Timor-Leste, where 70% of the population depends on agriculture for a source of income and survival. And recently, studies have found that global warming has led to varying levels of crop failures in Timor-Leste. So in 2016, Timor-Leste Ministry of Agriculture found that at the south coast of Timor-Leste received low rainfall due to the El Nino phenomenon, resulting in the massive crop failures, adding to the death of livestock. And this agrarian distress has led to farmers to delay rice field preparation. So, and then how does it drive human mobility? In a recent visit last year in December 2020, I noticed that there's a public worry. There is a national concern about how people who are leaving the countries for industrialized states, especially industrialized states that are in need of low-skilled workers, because a lot of people depend on agriculture as their source of income. Crop failures have displaced people to move away and go migrate somewhere else. So in studying the data and seeing the recent patterns of migration in East Timor-Leste, we've seen internal migration that is for the past 10 years. We've seen like internal migration that is nearly now populate in Dili, the capital city of East Timor. 40% of the people who live in the capital city are migrated internally from other municipalities. And there's many UN reports that warn about how climate-induced migration in the future, and that not the government, not a lot of local authorities paying attention to this. And it is important to pay attention to how 60% of the population of Timor-Leste are actually under 35 years old. The youth population is larger than the older population. So lack of work opportunities has resulted in many young people moving overseas. And so they migrate to countries like United Kingdom, Australia, South Korea to perform a variety of work from horticulture to poultry industry. So in the next slide, I'm just sharing like a couple of news that I've canvassed that explains this like a rapid migration. For example, in the top left-hand corner, there is a news about how last year close to 300 people are going to Australia, and then 70 people are going to South Korea, and this is migrant workers in the UK, and then 700 people are going to Brunei, and then this year alone the government is planning to send close to 10,000 people to Australia and Korea. So the idea of climate migration that I emphasize in my chapter here is not to think about climate migration in a linear or direct relationship. International Organization for Migration considers climate change a trigger to other existing drivers of human mobility, such as political, social, economic, and demographic circumstances that adversely affect people's lives or living conditions, and are obliged to leave their habitual homes or choose to do so either temporarily or permanently. A decision to move are decided by job prospects, level of income, and security in destination areas. And actually, migration is also a form of adaptation strategy, and something that a lot of adaptation projects do not pay attention to. And because migration offers alternative source of income and reduce reliance on the environment for subsistence, such as in agrarian societies like East Timor. because migration and food insecurity are linked inextricably to the issue of labor markets and rural-urban economic inequality, I examined both issues in the context of what I call precarity. Economic precarity builds on the notion of vulnerability, but instead of calling vulnerability, it draws instead from the concept of precarity to shift our understanding of adaptation as inherent in the issue of power rooted in specific geographical milieu and provide us with analytical tools to examine how precarity is mediated to power structure. So precarity is a term developed by Guy Standing. He developed this the term to help us understand how precarity, like how people's vulnerabilities, it is a function of labor market, and argues that liberalization and changes in economic structures and conditions have generated a new emerging class with common experiences, such as in this case, like migrant workers. I found that Guy Standing's concept of precarity helpful because it usually understand that labor migration dynamic in East Timor because of lack of job opportunities, lack of necessary skills, and then climate change compel young people to migrate internationally and to perform labor-intensive work. As one of the scholar in East Timor called to leave the country or get left behind. I don't think I have the time to talk more about what I think about the climate, what I found from the climate adaptation project in East Timor, but I would say this as my concluding thought. The ways adaptation climate adaptation project in Timor-Leste is carried out is they're heavily depoliticized. So a lot of international organizations that are involved with climate adaptation projects. Sorry, yes, I'm finishing in the next 30 seconds. They ignore issues of climate precarity such as food insecurity and migration that are fueled by agrarian distress in recent years. Internationalization of climate change policy deprives political leaders in Timor-Leste of understanding how climate change is impacting their communities, nor does it give them a chance to propose alternative solutions to address the climate crisis. I contend that a lot of international organizations that use climate change adaptation as an entry point to promote narrative development by making climate change a non-political issue. I argue that international organizations engaged in climate adaptation that governed by neoliberal logic continues to reproduce a global order based on technocratic paradigms, rural intervention, and professionalization of climate change, professionalization of development under the pretext of climate change. And I'm happy to talk more about what I mean by that. But thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Ariel. That was really wonderful. Look, you don't have to get it all out. We understand how much work you put into it, and I think what you gave us was extraordinary. So with that, please switch off your camera if you may. I think it's a real pleasure to now introduce to our third panelist, Tu Nguyen Hoang An, who is a graduate student at the European University Institute. She's majoring in transnational governance. Previously, she was an intern at the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And she is very interested in Vietnamese politics, Asian security, and public policy. And today she's going to speak on her chapter, which was on human trafficking. And I think, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. I think all of you at home, if you've noticed, there's a growing trend in these chapters, which is people networks, good or for bad, people power, good or for bad, the networks of people and the way that power is mobilized through them. And in this one, with the trafficking case, but also the response to trafficking, I think Tu has got some wonderful things to say. Tu, the floor is yours.
Thanks, John, for the kind introduction. And again, many thanks to the Pacific Forum for having me today. Like the previous panelists, I also prepared the slides. So let me first share the screen. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce the chapter of MICE, which is about human trafficking in Vietnam. And I identify this as a top-tier non-traditional security threat in the 21st century for the country. But first, let me give you a brief overview of the points that I would like to cover today. So I will start by explaining the concept of non-traditional security threat and then link it with the human trafficking issue. Next, I will describe the extent of human trafficking in Vietnam. And moving on in part 3, I will identify the existing measures that Vietnam has taken to address the human trafficking. Based on these measures and their limitation, I would like to propose two sets of policy recommendations. To begin with, I think it's important to explain the concept of non-traditional security issues. So traditionally, the security concept is state-centric and military-oriented. However, according to Meli Caballero Anthony, non-traditional security issues are challenges to the survival and well-being of people and states that arise primarily out of non-military sources. So in this sense, human trafficking can be considered as a non-traditional security issue because the crime itself is detrimental to the security of people and of state. Also, it does not involve the use of military and it requires a comprehensive and multinational responses. When it comes to the impacts of human trafficking, research tend to focus on the human security aspect. In fact, we cannot deny how human trafficking has a negative impact on the health, the right to life, and the freedom from violence of the victims. However, I think it's equally important to highlight the impact of human trafficking on the national security. For example, human trafficking can lead to more crimes such as money laundering, smuggling of weapons, smuggling of drugs, or terrorism. And also, human trafficking clearly will lead to the displacement of many people and the local communities, which in turn will lead to the instability of the state. Given that, how is the extent of human trafficking in Vietnam? So in Vietnam, human trafficking is an urgent and pressing issue, and the country has long been known as a great hub of Southeast Asia for human trafficking. However, not until recent incidents, for example, the access lorry death in 2019, when 39 Vietnamese nationals found death in a container lorries on the way to access of the UK, or the case of dozens of Vietnamese casino workers flees Cambodia in 2022. And these kind of incidents have made the human trafficking issue gain the attention from the public and the media, and also it's put the issue in the spotlight. So Vietnam can be considered as a source, transit, and to a lesser extent, a destination country for human trafficking. As you can see on the screen right now, the figures show the numbers of identified victims of trafficking in Vietnam from 2006 to 2016, according to the data from the Ministries of Public Security of Vietnam. And during this period alone, there was more than 10,000 people who were identified as the victims of trafficking. Many of them were women, children, and the members of ethnic communities. A lot of them were living under poverty and also with limited access to education. Given the prevalence of human trafficking issues, what has the Vietnamese government been doing to deal with the issue of human trafficking? So in terms of legislation, there are two important key legal documents. First, the Criminal Code in 2015, and second, the Law on Prevention and Combatants of Human Trafficking. The Criminal Code criminalize the human trafficking crime and also outline the penalties for those who get involved in the crime. Meanwhile, the Law on Prevention and Combatants of Human Trafficking outline the measures to prevent and also to support the victims of trafficking. Apart from that, the Vietnamese government has also adopted 4 national action programs against trafficking covering the periods from 2004 to 2025. And these national action programs are extremely important in the implementation of the above legislations. Over the last 2 decades, the government has also adopted several other policies, such as providing legal assistance, vocational training, and health services to the victims. And since human trafficking is transnational by nature, the government has also cooperated closely with many countries, especially neighboring countries such as China, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Malaysia. And it has also cooperated with the ASEAN to better address the issues of human trafficking. However, I think it's important to highlight that the current measures still have a lot of limitation and shortcoming. To evaluate the effectiveness of countries' efforts in combating human trafficking, the U.S. Department of State issues trafficking in person reports annually. And in their report, they come up with the 3-tier rankings, with tier 1 being the most effective and country fully comply with the Trafficking Victim Protection Act. Meanwhile, tier 3 being the least effective and countries do not comply with the Trafficking Victim Protection Act. And as you can see on the screen right now is the Vietnam tier ranking from 2010 to 2022. And during this period, Vietnam was listed as either tier 2 watch list, or tier 3, which show the existing shortcomings of the government effort. Based on the current limitations, I come up with 2 sets of policy recommendations for Vietnam to better deal with the issues: prevention measures and victim support measures. In terms of prevention measures, I think it's important for the government to continue to empower the economic capabilities of the people. As I already mentioned previously, a lot of people was living under the poverty, and it's important to give them loans, to give them consultants, and also, if possible, the government should try to provide more vocational training and job opportunity so that they can improve the economic situation. Another important aspect is education access. The government should provide more scholarship, flexible schooling hours, other type of support such as free textbook, so that people are encouraged to go to school and raise their awareness about the issue of human trafficking. Last but not least, I think the Vietnamese government needs to continue to work on law enforcement. So the government needs to make sure that penalties have the deterrent effects, as well as the government needs to deal with all forms of human trafficking. At the moment, most of the laws mainly deal with the sex trafficking, which is the most common type of trafficking in Vietnam. However, I believe it is also important to deal with other types of trafficking, such as organ trafficking, marriage trafficking, or forced labor. Another important issue to focus on is victim support measures. So even though the government already provides some certain support, but not many people actually have been benefited from these kind of policies, because they are required to provide certificates of being victims of trafficking, which is extremely hard. So I think it's important for the government to make sure that every victim receives the support in terms of safe accommodation for sufficient periods of time. They should also receive the support in terms of healthcare, not only physical health, but also mental health. And last but not least, the government should provide assistance on legal and administrative procedures for these kind of people, so that they can be able to reintegrate into their local community. And also, this is important to prevent them from being re-trafficked in the futures. This is also the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to on the questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Thierry. And if I can ask everyone to turn on their screens, and we are going to kick off with some questions. I was normally going to summarize, but I think for the sake of the audience, I will open up the floor. If you would like to ask a question, you can either type it in the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your hand, and I will turn to you to ask the question. If you do ask the question, though, do keep it short, because just for the sake of time, and we may go a little over. Please let me know if you can't stay on very long for our panelists. I think I see someone has asked something there. Okay, so we have an interesting question that's come up. The overarching security concerns that plague Southeast Asia take the form of non-traditional security threats, including social instability, climate change, and human trafficking. What do the authors think, the security concerns connected to other countries in the region? And are these based on individual nation states? If they're connected, how are these countries able to overcome aforementioned security concerns apart from ASEAN mechanisms? Okay, I think we can see where that question is coming from. There's certainly, for those of us who deal with the region, there's always a sensitivity around the great powers in the region, be it the United States, be it China. There's also feuds between various ASEAN nations, sometimes long traditional feuds. It's no doubt that some of the issues we've discussed today maybe correlate or coordinate a little bit with another external power for one of the individual countries. I will note for this study, people chose their own topics. In our previous, in the overall study, we did have some traditional security issues, including the South China Sea, a presentation by Bruneian author, and we also had, okay, so that's kind of an interesting question to kick us off. Tu, you just kind of ended. I'm going to go straight to you if you don't mind. In terms of human trafficking, can you see other states playing a role in that? Is there a traditional security element to this that relates to this non-traditional? And give us a minute in your answer if possible.
Yes, sure. First of all, thank you for your questions. And clearly from my observations, I think not only Vietnam, but definitely other countries in the regions of Southeast Asia and also other neighboring countries are facing this kind of non-traditional security issues, including human trafficking. For example, in my presentation, I already mentioned about the case of China's, of Cambodia's, of Thailand's and Laos. And I think definitely this is a concern of the whole regions. And I think in the questions, the author asked also about the use of ASEAN mechanism to deal with this kind of non-traditional security issues. And also from my opinions, I think at the moment, ASEAN plays an important role in gathering the countries in Southeast Asia together to discuss about these kind of security concerns. So it is important to facilitate this kind of dialogue-based mechanisms. However, I think still I want to see more practical actions from this country to see more cooperations, for example, sharing informations or exchange of visas so that they can deal with these kind of transnational issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Tia, I think the Myanmar case study is quite an interesting one. What's the involvement of external powers or regional powers in, it's quite great, isn't it?
Thank you very much for the question. I think it's important to recognize that even though it seems Myanmar's case is domestic only, it has huge consequences, security consequences on the ASEAN region. As you have already mentioned, there is great rivalry between China and United States at the moment, and we would like to emphasize the centrality of ASEAN in dealing with the matter in ASEAN. If ASEAN mechanisms failed in dealing with Myanmar, it could invite the involvement of the larger power into the region, and we don't want that. We had seen what that led to in the 1970s, 1980 with Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that the Myanmar is a population of 50 million people, and a majority of them are young people. If the country is not stable, it will have migrants pouring into the neighboring countries, which will have huge security concerns, terrorism, and the pandemic thing, a lot of illegal gambling, human trafficking. We've already seen these drug trafficking, human trafficking, such in the last few months because of the instability within the country. And we will continue to see this kind of trends if Myanmar is not stabilized within next 5 to 10 years. So we don't want that. There's a lot of issues that ASEAN needs to focus on right now. And Myanmar needs to be dealt within the ASEAN frameworks.
So, sorry, before we go to Ariel, so can I just follow up that question? So in terms of the right to protect, you see that as being carried out by a coalition of ASEAN states. And if I can just ask, is that realistic given the current, shall we say, lack of consensus in ASEAN on Myanmar?
I think the question is not about whether it is realistic or not, because it will only be realistic when there is the will to actually act, and then we will see that these things could be done. But we need to push into that direction, because there has been precedents not only around the world but also in the region of the United Nations Security Council taking an initiative to intervene in the case of Cambodia, for instance. That could be done, but the problem is that there is no consensus, as you said, within ASEAN so some still believe that the military regime could be negotiated back to the negotiation table and they can be reasoned with. But what I was trying to argue in my chapter was that there is the structural origins, and the reason the military stayed the coup d'etat in the first place was because they felt they were losing control over the country and the economy, and the young people, they also felt that they had a future within this new democratic transition, and they started to see their lives becoming better. So this is irreconcilable, so as to speak. So we need to take a stand, and the best way forward is for the ASEAN to take an initiative and start talking about the right to protect. It doesn't need to right away the military intervention in the country, but it could start from other policy initiatives within the right to protect framework.
The diplomatic right to protect, or the political pressure right to protect.
They need to start talking about it. They need to start talking about it, and they can talk about how it will look like. It could be something of US, China, and ASEAN-led coalition heading into the country, and like tripartite body taking charge of the elections, for instance. That could be done. And the reason the military felt that they can do whatever they want is they are not feeling this kind of pressure from the international community. They are not afraid of sanctions, but the military intervention, even if it is talk about the military intervention, that could change the calculus of the military generals.
All right, we're going to come back to you because I think you've stroked up some really interesting issues. Ariel, sir, I would like to call on you. What's your sense in terms of that original question? Climate change is, first of all, of course, great powers, both regional and extra-regional. They have an impact on the climate, so that's the obvious one. But can I ask you more directly? How do those powers impact the debate on climate change adaptability for your thinking, for your understanding, sir?
Yeah, actually, I'm currently in Thailand researching about climate change and water access. And this question makes me think about, in terms like for this question, climate change affects each country in a very different way, very nuanced, right? Like what we're looking at in Thailand with our partner university, Khon University, is how climate change affects the ability of people to have water access for their crops, right? Like, so, whether or not a farmer chooses to plant rubber or cocoa or rice depends on their perception of water access. So, and this is, and if they feel that it is not profitable to be a farmer anymore, they just migrate somewhere like to Bangkok or Chiang Mai. And I think that this is a conversation that we don't have enough, right? Like how climate change, I think we think of climate change as just like a sea level rise, or like, I think a lot of people think of climate change as banning plastics, and plastic has nothing to do with climate change at all. Like, banning plastic doesn't stop climate change, but it is affecting the livelihoods of people, and it is a threat to their human security that a lot of countries are not, or like there's just not a consensus understanding of like what does that mean in Indonesia. I'm currently working with the ISWA Center. We're looking at how how climate change is affecting the small holders, farmers who only own like small pieces of land, and how they're all wiped out and they have to move somewhere. And for like institution, I'm on the side of like not too optimistic with ASEAN, just because of not that I don't like ASEAN, but I think ASEAN is designed in a way that it's not supposed to like do intervention, right? Like even when they actually have any this like a real discussion about real issue affecting regions, they don't have any like a binding agreement. Like countries cannot agree on anything. So I write in my chapter that I think a lot of climate solutions need to be sensitive to what people want, and like if climate is affecting the job market, then climate solutions need to be sensitive to that. Like, so we need to think about how can we address job insecurities, climate related job insecurities.
Great. Thank you, Ariel. Sue, I want to come back to you. I feel like perhaps out of the three panelists, there seems to be the most regional consensus on trafficking. No country says they promote trafficking. No country agrees with it. Almost all of them are willing to do something about it. When I was at APCSS, a Department of Defense Regional Center down the road here, we had a great Vietnamese fellow who, for her project, she organized a nonprofit organization to work with the Vietnamese police forces on trafficking issues. And so do you have a sense that perhaps, I see all the people trying to resolve the issue. Do you feel like it's really effective? Are we getting the gangs, is my question. Are we really solving this, or is it just window dressing, not very deep and just superficial? What's your feeling in terms of the current approaches towards resolving trafficking?
Maybe I would say from the perspective of Vietnam. So as far as I can say, regarding the effectiveness of the government efforts, I can tell that there is a strong political will from the central governments in dealing with the human trafficking issues. And I think this is also the same with other countries, as you mentioned, like every country tries to deal with the issue of human trafficking. But what I can say is that there is a lack of training for the people, for the stakeholder, for example, border guards, for the court, for the police, or for the medical examiners. These kind of people, they also need to receive the training so that they can deal with the issues and they better handle the victims. And also, I think another important issue is that the current efforts is not effective enough, also because there is a lack of the reflections and assessments of their effectiveness. I think it's really, really important for the country to come together, and then maybe they can share experience, policy transfer, that kind of methods, so that they can learn from each others and better improve their own laws and efforts.
Great. So training is a really, it's right. Border guards have to see, no one has a label, I'm being trafficked, right? So the border guards have to be able to recognize a victim. Also, I wonder about data. How do you, how can we link the issue when, a lot of these criminal networks, they don't have the data openly. So we have to learn whether the numbers are going up or down. Thank you so much for that. We're coming close to the end. So I want to ask Tia one last question, Ariel one last question, and Thu one last question. If you can keep your answers relatively short. Tia, I really enjoyed, I wish we could talk, this is, I love all of three of your things, but this one for me, revolution, it's such a, for us Westerners, we had so many revolutions, the American one, the French one, the Russian one, they really marked our history. Even our country, the United States' own revolution is exactly what started our independence. So for us, it's a very emotional issue. we had no international help in the United States, just one country, France. And the only reason it seems that the French could help us was they weren't Republicans. Of course, they had a king at the time, but of the superpower struggle between UK and France at the time. So given, that's not the ideal for Myanmar, but we also have, I think you agreed that ASEAN, although ideal, has not found the consensus yet. What's the answer? Do you see it as more education inside ASEAN from people like yourself, from people who understand the social movement? What's, if we were going to take one hard sort of policy answer today, what's the solution for you? So I'll go to Ariel next, and then two, and then come back for your answers. Ariel, I love how thoughtful this is, because really you've made people at the core. A lot of climate change things starts with the science, and I agree the science is important, but we mustn't forget the people. Ariel, how do you feel, is this how do we organize? Do we organize grassroots up or state down? What's the best way that we can sort of build resilience in your thinking, in your model? And then two, in terms of, thank you very much for the training idea, but, how does beyond training, what are some of the answers that are required beyond awareness? I think you've given us some real excellent starting steps, but do you see some other measures? And that's sort of on the hard policy side. So we'll go back in order, and if you can keep your answers very short, we're just going over a little, probably we'll go over 10 minutes. So my apologies that you're staying on a little longer, but if that's all right with you. So with that, Tiha, please.
Thank you very much. It is also something that I have also personally thinking a lot, like what could be done realistically given the constraints of the international system as of right now. Of course, we would like to see the R2P and the intervention from ASEAN and UNSC and whatnot, but there will be divisions within ASEAN, and it's not going to change over a short-term period as much as we would like to see. So, and it's not necessarily a bad thing that ASEAN countries disagree on how to best approach this issue or that issue. But I think we need to have the bottom line of what the international community is going to do. For instance, are you going to recognize the military regime as the legitimate government of Myanmar? That's not what Myanmar people want. And what about the National Unity Government? And they say they have the mandate from the election. They say they have the mandate from the people. What ASEAN is going to do, what the United Nations is going to do, what US and China is going to do, they need to provide a definite answers to the basic framework. And then within the basic framework, you can have adjustments. So even if you don't recognize the military regime as the legitimate government, you can still have informal dialogue. We are not going to oppose that. But at least you have to have the basic values, basic consensus within the international community. That can be done realistically. And the second thing is to provide the support that is possible to be given. Of course, the Myanmar people would like to have the armed support from the international community. That's not going to happen for whatever reasons. We understand that, but there are things that could be provided realistically at the moment, like the financial support. For instance, the National Unity Government has been asking the United States to release the $1 billion held by the US government that was previously deposited by the Democratic Civilian Government. That could make a difference on ground, and they will be able to use this kind of money to whatever they want. And so these kind of realistic diplomatic measures could be taken right now.
Brilliant. That's a very concrete answer and exactly the model for my other panelists. Thank you, Tiha. And, really, I think all of our not every country agrees with the movements, but I think our heart is with Myanmar generally and, feel the pain of your nation. So with that, Ariel, sir.
Thank you. I'm not a big institutionalist. I think we've done that, and we've seen how, in terms of climate change, we've seen how, at least in my research, I don't think that institutionalizations of climate change is going to solve. I think for me, I see adaptations as a form of like they're necessary, but they're also band-aids, right? Like because everyone agrees that at least like climate scientists agree that the only way we can stop climate change is emission reduction. So that's very difficult. But you know, a lot of countries are not industrialized countries are not willing to you know like meet their emission reduction that is set by the Paris Agreement. So you know every year we keep spending on adaptation. Like, you know, like you build the seawalls, and then the next 5 years you need to build more because you know this the sea level rise is going to keep coming out. So I think like at premise, like I don't think we should see adaptation as the main solution. Because it is not the real solution. It is just like a band-aid solution. And I know, you know, it's and I've given this answer, and I know like not many people are happy. Like they want to hear like a concrete solutions, but it's just yeah, that like the whole premise of my paper is like criticizing adaptation, but yeah, so I don't have like concrete solution
Don't worry.
to give us.
Well,
Yeah,
your
but
answer is still profound. I think, you know, you've given a very thoughtful and profound answer. We can't, you know, your rejection of that idea of resiliency is in itself, I think, a very profound one. And, you know, it's not obvious how we can stop our current carbon economy, but I can see people are moving in that direction. And so maybe there's
yeah.
small signs, the next generation, or the next generation. We
Hopefully,
really
yeah.
start to see movement. Thank you, sir. That was wonderful too. The floor is yours as the last one.
So apart from awareness raising campaign and training, I would also propose some other policies. For example, in terms of law, I think it's important for countries to make sure that their domestic laws is consistent with the international law and addressing all form of the human trafficking, because human trafficking is really is a complicated issue with different forms. And then I think it's important in their law to address all of them, and also make sure that the penalties has the deterrent effect enough so that the traffickers will refrain from involving in this kind of activities. And also, I think another policy recommendation that I would like to see is more cooperation between the government and also NGOs. Because, for example, in the case of Vietnam, I know that there are lots of NGOs working on the issues and they plays an important role. So I think if other countries can also enhance this kind of cooperations between the public, private, between the government and the NGOs, I think there would be a better effect and the issue would be solved quicker. And yes, I think also final thing is maybe try to cooperate between countries, because I think usually these kind of organized crime gangs and the traffickers, they work together in different countries. So it's better if the countries cooperate and identify these gangs and the trafficker together. Yes,
Right,
that's it.
transnational organization, anti-criminal cooperation. Great, thank you so much. Look, everyone at home, thank you for staying a little late with us. We just really enjoyed hearing from these three panelists. I think it was a very powerful discussion. All three topics are super important, and I think our panelists deserve a really big thank you for that. So let's put our hands together at home and say thank you. And thank you very much to you three for not only your excellent contributions today, but your written chapters for our book. Please find the book at home, and also you can find it in the chat. I've been John Hemmings. I've been your host. I'm going to turn it over to Carol, who's going to close off by a few closing remarks. So with that, thank you. Carol, if not, what, oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Hello, aloha, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. So as Dr. Hemmings mentioned, the publication is available in the chat box. I'll put it in one more time. We highly recommend that you read their Issues and Insights volumes, as all three authors, actually 7 authors, including the panel from earlier this week, worked very hard on this publication. And finally, we would appreciate if you could take a few minutes to fill out our post-event survey. This feedback is very valuable, and we will use it for future programming here at Pacific Forum. So that is all the announcement that I have, and I will turn it back to Dr. Hemmings. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That's it from us. You've been wonderful. And please have a great morning, great afternoon, and a great evening. And from Honolulu, aloha. Thank you, everyone.